Now, some new information has come out about the Southport killer. It was that incident that led to the race riots where misinformation came out that the suspect was an immigrant. In fact, he was born in Cardiff. Now, this new information has already been warped and weaponized to suit the right wing. Now, you may or may have not heard, but apparently the attacker downloaded Al-Qaeda material, prompting many on the right to jump on this and claim they're being vindicated, namely Nigel Farage, and he said this.
In the wake of the horrific murder of those 3 girls in Southport in July of this year, I asked some questions saying, please tell us the truth. Stop the online speculation. Well, it's taken a long time to find out more about the individual. He's now been charged, believe it or not, under the Biological Weapons Act because the police have found ricin in his home. He's been charged under the Terrorism Act, alleged to have downloaded Al-Qaeda terrorist materials. But the murder of the girls and the serious injury of the others, that is still being treated as a non-terror incident because they don't know what the motives were. We've also been told this afternoon there are other facts that we don't yet know because the Crown Prosecution Service say they will come out in good time in court and are not to be discussed now. So that's all right then. That all makes sense to you, doesn't it? Yes, absolutely.
Now, I love how he says, stop the online speculation. Well, it was exactly that led to the riots. And guess what? He's speculating now. I mean, he said himself that not all of the information is out there. Now, MP and former Reform leader Richard Tice has said that Farage deserves an apology.
My colleague and friend Nigel Farage was given all sorts of grief and abuse by many politicians, many in the media, for asking simple questions about what we were being told, were we being told the truth, the whole truth, based on what was known. And it's pretty clear now that, in fact, Nigel, once again, was right, and that we were not being told the truth. And I think there are, as I say, very serious questions to ask.
Now, what exactly was he right about? Well, it turns out that the media and the right-wing politicians have made it out that the suspect downloaded material made by Al-Qaeda. In fact, it was a US study on Al-Qaeda, which can be bought by anyone.
Here, because the manual in question was a US military study into jihadis and Al-Qaeda. It was not an actual Al-Qaeda manual.
Now, this is the manual in question. As you can see, it's a book that can be purchased by anyone. Now, whether this was used or not, we don't know. What we do know is that the right are using anything they can to advance their agenda. Samuel, I want to first ask you, what exactly have the right and Nigel Farage been vindicated on? What are they trying to insinuate here?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think we we have an idea. I mean, first thing to say about this is that people like Nigel Farage can't wait, unfortunately, for incidents like this to jump all over it and not know all the facts, but continue to spew misinformation anyway. I think the aim is to continue to divide this country. I think Nigel Farage in particular, preys upon incidents like this to demonize immigrants, to continue the narrative that in particular Muslims can't be trusted, and there's this always nefarious tone with him in the sense that you can't trust these group of people. That's always this insinuation, and I think it's just so rich to see how that whole thing unfolded, where without a lot of information or any information, it just didn't stop people like him from spewing lies. They just cannot wait for the opportunity, and I think it's sort of formulaic by now. We know how it goes down. Something happens. We don't have all the information. Right-wing figures like Nigel Farage take bits and bobs of the story and twist it in a way that suits their right-wing narrative about immigration, because that's their main thing. That's the only thing they can run on. It's fear of others, immigration, and that's why they're doing this.
I mean, there's a problem of indoctrination, obviously, but the person was born in Wales. Yeah, the race riots went after refugees, anyone of colour. I mean, they set fire to a hotel with children inside. So, of course, the right are going to use this to try and win the narrative war, but it doesn't change anything. This fact doesn't change anything, right? There's this false narrative that the left supports Islamism. I mean, I think that's rubbish. The left are secularists, which is often in conflict with all religions, including Islam. Islam, like many other religions, is ultra-conservative in nature. What the left defends is Muslims facing discrimination. I mean, we don't say that the Westboro Baptist Church is representatives of all white Christians, do we? Samuel, there's a danger here of painting those on the left as terror supporters. We're called it when we support the Palestinians. How worried are you about this narrative being spun? And do you think the weaponization of this new information could spark another set of riots?
I don't think I am more worried than I was, say, a week ago when I think about these things, because I think this is just an ongoing thing at this point. We know that regardless of what happens, they're going to paint the left as terrorist sympathizers anyway. And I think I've just, on a personal note, I've just have lost all interest in keeping up in what, they think about the activities of the left, seeing how they have been denying a genocide, quite frankly. It's disgusting. So whatever their opinions on it. But no, I think that it won't necessarily change too much, because, like I say, the right are still going to latch on to anything they can find. They continue to promote this narrative. I think longer term, just in general, I think I'm just thinking about the state of their attacks and how it's going. And I don't know. I think what we're seeing now is, and a bit of a prediction here, is the Labour centre is going to collapse. I think they'll get increasingly more unpopular. This is Rachel Reeves' Gestama. And I think what you're going to see is the rise of the Greens and the rise of Reform. And it will be interesting to see just how much Reform will have success with these narratives that are going on in the US, for example, with the immigrants, continuous sort of bashing of immigrants and all that kind of stuff. And I just quickly say that I do find it interesting that in more recent years, Nigel Farage's, the Tommy Robinsons, they've moved away from sort of talking about, the Romanian next door, all that kind of stuff. It's moved more specifically, like you said, to an anti-Islam sort of settlement, which is kind of, which is sad. There's always been an anti-Islam, strain there, but I think in particular recently, especially with what we see with Israel-Palestine, I think that's also increasing the focus on Islam. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's any target they can find, quite frankly. It will always change. It will always change. Now, I think what worries me the most is that, you mentioned the centre, the Labour centre, or centre-right. Because they go along with this narrative, because they try to appease them, they think it's a way of sort of, counteracting Reform. But it doesn't work. And actually, by doing these... following on these narratives that the right are doing, where it comes to clamping down on illegal immigration or bringing down immigration, it doesn't counteract the right. It doesn't counteract Reform, but they embolden them, don't they?
It's always like ceding ground. The idea of not having a strong platform against, and not to take it to the US, but I think it's just quite apt to talk about. There's been a lot of criticism over the handling of immigration by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. In particular, people are noting that, at the moment, maybe polling shows that there may be some sort of short-term electoral gain from chasing the narrative that, we need to be stronger on immigration and stop the boat or close the border or whatever it is. But what we find is that when you do that, you actually cede the ground to these right-wing figures who continue to just use that space to say, aha, even the left cede the ground. They're saying that, this and that. So I think it's really important that we have, and I don't see this in Keir Starmer, which is not surprising, but if we did have, I think, a strong progressive Labour leader, he would stand on the principles of actually look at the positives, and actually we should not be focusing on negatives of minority communities, and this is obviously a race to the bottom. It's it's a convenient scapegoat for rich people, which is why we hear so much about this so-called issue.
I'm glad you brought in rich people, because that's what it boils down to, right? It's the narrative from the rich. When I say rich, we're talking about billionaires who own our newspapers, politicians who serve the rich. It's their scapegoat. And then it's the so-called Progressive Party, whether it's the US Democrats, whether it's the UK Labour Party. They're so weak that they think it's a electoral strategy to follow in this sort of narrative. It never works. It doesn't. I mean, Rachel Reeves could implement a wealth tax and say, actually, you're being screwed over by your workplace. But they lean into it and they think, do you know what, that's going to get us votes. But in the short term, maybe. In the long term, I mean, you're going to get reforms saying they're not going far enough. You can never please these people.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.